Hi everybody, I'm Dr. David Newman. Today we're going to walk you through a little bit of our process for the barbecue boot camp on cooking baby back ribs. But first, we're going to start by showing you a whole pig and a little bit of the anatomy of the pig and where some of the cuts come from. So as you can see here, we have a whole pork carcass that has been USDA inspected in our facility. So we have this entire carcass that we're going to utilize for grilling, for slow cooking and smoking, which is going to be the topic of what I'm going to go through today. Just to run you through the anatomy. The back end of the pig is where the ham is located. This is the ham. Right here in the center section is where bacon is coming from. Right here along the middle section on the top is where the pork loin comes from. And then we have the pork shoulder roast and the picnic roast. Now, to help show you a little bit better on the ribs and the roast in particular, I brought some demo pieces that we cut out already. So right here is a baby back rib. But pigs actually have two types of ribs. They have baby back ribs and they have spare ribs. So if you can see, the ribs are located on the inside of the cavity here. These are the long traditional spare ribs that you probably think of. You can have either spare ribs or St. Louis style. We'll show you that later. Or you can have a baby back rib. And where the baby back rib comes from is right here on the inside next to what we call the chine bone. And what it is it's the bones that lie directly underneath the loin. So it's impossible to get bone-in pork chops and baby back ribs if you have a pig process. And if you see, as a demonstration, where this lies is right here. You can see how it fits in there almost perfectly. That is where the baby back rib comes from. So we're going to go through that in a few minutes. The other popular cut is the pork shoulder roast, traditionally used for pulled pork or pork steaks. This is a trimmed, USDA inspected pork shoulder roast, and where that comes from is on this region right here in the shoulder. I'll show you from the outside. That piece lies directly like so. So, a little bit of meat trivia for the day. Now we're going to cook ribs. Thanks. Alright guys, now we're going to talk about the baby back ribs and the preparation that we do on the baby back ribs for the boot camp program. So we have a whole table of baby back ribs here. They pretty much will come prepared and ready to cook. But there's one secret to cooking ribs that you got to start with, and that is a trick called pulling the membrane off the ribs. So on ribs, you have the meat side of the ribs, which always will be identified obviously as being a little bit more meaty. And then you have the bone side of the ribs. Now, on the bone side, there is a small membrane. We'll pan down here a little closer and I'll show you. There's a membrane on the outside of the ribs. And if you see here, I've started to work this up. If you could get in there close, you see that membrane? You see how really tough it is. You've got to get underneath the edge of that with a knife, or a fork works well, and start to pull that membrane off of these ribs. You see how it's pulling off there in a narrow sheet? I'll just start to demonstrate how this one piece will look. So if you see that piece of connective tissue, it's very strong. I can't even pull it apart. So being so strong like that, the time, temperature, and humidity that you need for your seasoning is going to be directly impacted by this membrane if you don't pull it off, because your seasoning and your smoke is going to have a hard time penetrating. Plus, whenever you're done, even if you cook the ribs correctly, they're not going to be tender because you're going to run into that piece, that membrane, whenever you're done. So once we've pulled it, now we have an entire table here that are pulled. You take your ribs and you run a piece of seasoning. You can be pretty liberal. You can just pour a handful on there. Pour another handful on. So what we've got here today, we've got cinnamon chipotle rub. You can be pretty liberal whenever you're putting this on and just rub it into the meat really well. And we're about 2.5 to 3 hours away from starting our ribs right now. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to rub this in really well. we're going to run another line of our cinnamon chipotle down this side and work it in. And doing so for the next few hours, this will allow this salt and seasoning to penetrate the meat a little bit, to allow that salt to draw a little bit of water, because whenever we start the process of the smoking on the grill, we're going to add a lot of smoke, and we want to make sure that we maintain our flavor too with our seasoning. That is all the pre-prep that we do on our baby back ribs before going to the grill.